where do we stand on digital comics? Where do we stand on other variations on digital comics, like subscription digital comics through either one of the largest services like Scribd, which is actually predominantly for pros, but actually they launched a 10,000 title category of comics and graphic novels. And as they told me, it was one of the most incredible launches of any of their categories through it. So where do we stand now? I mean, we see in some cases, certainly in the traditional print industry now, that ebook sales have slowed down. I think to some extent, conventional publishers are reading the wrong message from this. They feared ebooks, and they certainly feared the pricing of ebooks. So where are we now as digital comics seem to really be catching on, and in another way, sending fans into print stores in many ways and into comic shops as well, looking for this new world of diverse comics?
Well, this is where I start choking on my own word balloon because it's just there's so much to say. I'm in a very weird place. I mean, I was one of the first people in North America to become like full-time obsessed with digital comics. I mean, literally even before the web got started, I was looking at the possibilities for comics in a digital environment, and the CD-ROM, the long lamented CD-ROM scene. And I had a lot of very high hopes, both creatively and in terms of distribution. And my last project was a graphic novel, and it's designed for the device. The thing is a book. And the reason was I was very dissatisfied with the reading formats that we had for long form stuff. There was a big split that isn't often acknowledged between comic strips and graphic novels, the long form stuff. The strips did really well online, just out in the wild web. They did tremendously, and we've had genuine success stories. People worry about newspaper comics disappearing. Just the newspaper part is disappearing. There are more strips than ever before. There are thousands more strips, and some of them are tremendously popular. So it was the format. That was a shotgun marriage as far as I'm concerned, the relationship between newspapers and comic strips in the beginning of the 20th century. There was always an uneasy linkage. But anyway, but meanwhile, if you want to do something that lasts for 300 or 400 pages, you have to be able to create that spell. Like what we expect when we're binge watching a show or watching a 2.5-hour movie, we want to be able to lose ourselves in that experience. And I think we have some really just kind of, pardon my language, kind of shitty reading experiences as far as the long form stuff goes. I'm not keen on pan and scan. I really hate it when we have upright rectangular pages that are just imported for print. So it's just a creative thing. It's just an aesthetic thing for me that I don't really feel like we have an entirely successful reading model. Also, right now we have a tension between the idea of responsive design in comics, because this notion of responsive design, that content ought to just be able to flow very naturally from one device to another. Oh, I'm going to enjoy it on my desktop, then then on my laptop, then on my tablet, then on my phone, and it all just reflows. But comics is defined by the shape of its presentation. In comics, it matters what shape it is. It matters what size it is. The juxtaposition of images next to each other, it matters. And so there's a tension there. So really, I just took a holiday. I went away. I made a graphic novel. And I concentrated just on creating for a book during that period. On the knowledge, not that my frustration sort of drove me away, but knowing that in a networked world, solutions are going to grow up around this problem, that this problem will be solved. But after banging my head against the wall for about 10 or 12 years, I just figured, let somebody else work on this for a while. I'm actually very optimistic about it, but I think right now when we look back at this period, we'll see it as a period during which we hadn't quite worked out just the usability, the reading experience. This is a usability problem. And one of the key aspects of that usability is that when you're reading a book, when you are reading a graphic novel in any form, you should have your eyes on the content the whole time. You should never look away for navigation. And you should never have to, compromise or have it retrofitted. We never put up with pan and scan on movies on television. Does anyone remember, is anyone old enough to remember, spaghetti westerns on television and they would like move the thing across because the aspect ratio is gone? We wouldn't put up with that now. We shouldn't put up with it with comics either. But that's end of rant.
So I am going to posit, lurking in potentia, a kind of graphic storytelling where that is size and position independent.
It can be done.
I'm going to posit that such a thing might exist.
Oh no, it absolutely can.
And that may be in the same way that what we were waiting for film was a kind of visual story. If you watch old movies, there's a lot of people walking back and forth because they do this in stage plays, right? There's this stage direction moment where you need to fill some space or you need to fill some time or you need to let a line set in, and people cross from one side of the stage to the other. And then someone invented cutting for films. Oh, I will just do. You don't have these people like walking to the bar and making a martini and then turning around and saying, I think you're wrong, right? I mean, you can just cut to them holding the martini. I think you're wrong. I think that we are living in a kind of age of very amazing digital comics that are so ubiquitous we don't notice them, and I think it started with the giant Little Nemo books. So if you want to talk about something that's presentation dependent, I've grown up reading Little Nemo reproductions that were 8.5 by 11 or maybe A4 size, and they were terrible, right? Little Nemo, Winter McKay's old comics from the beginning of the 20th century, they were paintings that were this big. They were tabloid-sized paintings. And reproduced like this, they're terrible. They're really visually uninteresting, hard to read, not all that cool. And one super dedicated fan was able to scan them at original resolution, they're all in the public domain, source a printer in the Far East, print them, use the internet to find the 1,000 people who wanted to buy that first printing and sell it through and do several printings since. It's now become a very common format. You see artist sketchbooks from IDW and so on that are in that format. That is a digital comic in as much as it's a thing that only exists because the internet exists.
Oh,
right?
well,
This is an incredibly important point. As soon as we have this non-tangible alternative world, people immediately, everybody got obsessed with this, like, oh, is print going to cease to exist or whatever? It's like, no, print just became visible for the first time. When I was starting out in comics, we all just were printing this stuff on newsprint and sometimes slightly better white paper. That was it. That was the means by which we got from A to B. We were looking for efficiency. We didn't even see the paper. The paper was ubiquitous. It was ubiquitous the way that air is ubiquitous for a musician, and you're sending your stuff across, the air with vibrations in the air. It's like you don't even notice that anymore because that's how it always is. But as soon as there was that non-tangible alternative, suddenly we saw what was in our hands for the very first time, and that's when you began to see beautiful print. That's when you got to see people like Chris Ware come along and say, I'm going to really think about the choice of paper, I'm going to think about the format, I'm going to create beautiful objects, I'm going to create something that's tangible and that has some aesthetic value for its tangibility.
I think that's all true, but what I'm talking about here is digital technology like shipping containers. Right, like it's global shipping, it's sourcing, overseas sourcing, it's the ability to find audiences. I think we are now in the crowd-funded age of digital comics, and I don't mean comics that are produced digitally. I mean comics whose end product is digital. I mean comics whose life is owed to the ability of the internet to connect audiences that are spread in a kind of Gaussian distribution all over the world without any one concentration that's tight enough to make it worth anyone's while to do traditional retail, that nevertheless makes it possible to have these improbable books that just couldn't have existed before. And that is the golden age of digital comics. Just because the end product isn't digital doesn't mean that those aren't digital comics. Those are so digital.
The invisible hand of digital infrastructure that's actually making some of the most gorgeous print books amazing. In fact, Locust Moon's Eisner-winning Little Nemo, an oversized, incredible tribute edition that indeed is as papery and as bookish as you would want. But certainly, Kickstarter had an amazing ability to bring that.
And certainly in keeping with the spirit of the original. The idea being that the dawn of a new century.
So a very good point. The digital is in there making these things possible, even when perhaps we're assuming that it's got to be something you read on a screen. But that isn't necessarily the case.
No, it's a good point.